Boom 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 boom.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into the fundamental principles of story design, based on the profound insights of Robert McKee, a true master of narrative.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is that our mission today isn't just about listing concepts. It's more about distilling these building blocks.
Yeah.
Really getting to the narrative skeleton, to understand why some stories hit us so hard and others just fall flat.
Exactly.
And it's not just for writers, really. It's valuable for anyone who loves a good story and kind of wants to peek behind the curtain, understand the mechanics.
Absolutely. So our journey today will take us from, well, the fundamental essence of what a story actually is, then through those critical trigger events that kick everything off.
The inciting incident, yeah.
Right. And how individual scenes are designed to drive change, the larger structural frameworks, and then finally that really powerful trio: crisis, climax, and resolution. So let's get right into it. What makes a story really, truly tick?
Well, McKee's core idea, and it's pretty central, is that a story isn't just what happens.
Right, not just a sequence of events.
Exactly. It's the meaning of those events. Facts alone, they aren't enough, are they? He's using this great example. Think about someone just pouring water into an empty jar. Okay, that's a fact. An event happened.
Pretty dry.
Yeah, but now imagine that jar represents a community's desperate hope, maybe after a long, devastating drought. And that water, it's the first rain. Suddenly, that simple action is loaded with profound meaning.
Okay, so it transforms a mere occurrence into a proper story event.
Precisely. That's the key distinction. A true story event isn't just something happening randomly. It has to create a meaningful, often irreversible change in a character's life value.
Like shifting from good to bad, or maybe hope to despair, or even life to death.
Exactly, those kinds of shifts. And crucially, this change must be the direct result of conflict. It's not just coincidence. It's narrative cause and effect.
So thinking about that drought example again, if rain just happens to fall totally by chance without any character's struggle or choice involved, that wouldn't count as a story event in McKee's framework.
No, not really. It highlights that difference, doesn't it, between just a random occurrence, however significant it might seem externally, and a deliberately crafted narrative moment that actually pushes the character's journey forward because of conflict.
Okay, that makes sense. It has to be earned in a way.
Yeah, earned through conflict. And this whole idea leads us right into the next crucial piece: the inciting incident.
Okay, so that's the spark, the very first domino to fall, the thing that knocks the character's life off balance and really forces them onto their journey, the point where everything changes.
That's it. It's the event that poses the central question of the story. What happens now, or will they succeed? And this incident, it can feel positive, like inheriting unexpected money, or negative, like, say, getting fired. It can happen to the character completely out of their control, or it can actually be a result of their own choice, something they do. But the main thing is, it destabilizes their world and implicitly sets up what McKee calls the mandatory scene.
Which is usually the climax where that big question gets answered, right?
Typically, yes. It sets the audience's expectation for that final confrontation or resolution.
And the timing. That's interesting, too. You mentioned sometimes it's right at the start, bang, like in Jones. But other times, it feels like it comes much later, like in Rocky. How does delaying it work?
Well, if you delay that main inciting incident, you absolutely need strong side plots or subplots to keep the audience hooked. You can't just have nothing happening.
Right, you need something to invest in.
Exactly. Rocky's relationship with Adrian, that burgeoning love story, is a perfect example. It keeps us deeply invested in Rocky as a person. We care about his life. Well, the bigger question of whether he'll actually fight Apollo Creed is still building in the background.
Gotcha. So that keeps the narrative engine running until the main plot fully kicks in. Okay, so we have the spark, the inciting incident. But how is the whole story constructed from there? You mentioned larger structures like acts.
Yeah, acts, or sometimes called bilinear in some texts, meaning sections or parts. Most commonly, stories unfold across 3 acts. And the key thing is that each act builds towards and ends with a major turning point.
A turning point, like
Yeah.
something that significantly shifts the direction of the story.
Exactly. Something that really changes the game, alters the stakes, or sends the plot in a new direction. The source used a great phrase, "Ischen ringjini de distieren," which basically means changing the color of the work. It's a point of major reorientation.
Okay, a game changer. But you also said the real work, the moment-to-moment stuff, happens in the scenes. How does McKee see those smaller units functioning?
He sees every single scene as a miniature story in itself. And the absolute core concept here is value change.
Value change. Explain that a bit more.
Okay, so a character enters a scene possessing a certain life value charge.
Hmm.
Let's say they walk in feeling hopeful, optimistic, that's a plus or a positive charge.
Yeah.
Then within that scene, they encounter conflict. And because of that conflict, they leave the scene with that value changed. Maybe their hope is dashed, and they leave feeling despair that's a negative charge. Or it could happen the other way around, from negative to positive.
Okay. So like someone walking into a meeting feeling really confident, but then getting challenged and walking out full of doubt.
Precisely that. Or someone entering a situation feeling fearful, negative, and leaving feeling courageous, positive. According to McKee, every single scene must turn on a specific value, hope, trust, freedom, justice, love, whatever it is, and it must involve conflict that causes a tangible shift in that value for the character involved.
And it's the sum of all these little shifts that propels the bigger story.
Exactly. These incremental changes accumulate, scene after scene, building pressure, creating momentum, and driving the overall narrative arc forward. Without that value shift in the scene, McKee argues, the scene is essentially static and, well, unnecessary.
And dissecting how that works, the conflict, the specific value, the turning point within the scene, and the emotion it generates, that's what he calls scene analysis. I remember reading his breakdown of that intense scene in Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly, the spider god scene.
Yes, that's a classic example he uses to illustrate the process in minute detail. And while dialogue obviously plays a role in conveying information.
Sure, characters have to talk.
Right, but McKee really hammers home the idea that subtext is far more critical.
Yeah.
It's like that iceberg analogy. The dialogue is just the tip, maybe 10%, but the real meaning, the unspoken thoughts and feelings, the subtext, that's the massive unseen part underneath that carries all the weight.
The classic Annie Hall scene with the subtitles, where they're having this awkward, polite conversation, but the subtitles show what they're really thinking.
Exactly. That's a perfect, almost literal illustration of subtext in action, what's said versus what's truly meant.
So you have these scenes, each with a value change, driven by conflict and subtext, grouped into acts with major turning points. And then how they're all presented, the sequence matters too.
Immensely. That sequence is what McKee calls the arrangement, or essentially the plot. The order in which you reveal these events, these scenes, to the audience can dramatically alter the tension, the suspense, the emotional impact, even the core meaning of the story. It's a huge part of the storyteller's craft.
Okay, and this careful arrangement, all these building blocks, they lead us towards the big payoff, right? This brings us to, well, the really nail-biting part. Crisis, climax, and resolution. This is where you, as the listener or viewer, are really leaning in.
Absolutely. This is the destination the whole journey has been heading towards. The climax is that absolute peak of tension. It's the main event, the grand confrontation, the final showdown that resolves the central conflict established way back by the inciting incident.
But before we hit that peak, there's the crisis. You mentioned it earlier. Is that maybe even more important than the climax itself?
Well, McKee argues it is, in many ways, especially for a revealing character. The crisis comes before the climax. It's the moment the protagonist is faced with an ultimate dilemma, an often agonizing choice between two paths, two values, maybe two irreconcilable desires or fears.
So it's the point of maximum pressure, the toughest decision.
Exactly. It has to be a truly difficult choice, often between two goods or two evils, where the stakes are incredibly high and the decision is irreversible. Think of Thelma and Louise at the edge of the Grand Canyon, drive off or surrender. That's a crisis. Or in The Deer Hunter, the internal struggle about whether to shoot the deer. It's a moment of truth.
Moral crossroads, often.
Very often. And it's in making that choice, under that immense pressure, that the character's true nature, their deepest values, are revealed to us.
Wow. And then the climax is the direct result, the action taken because of that crisis decision.
Precisely. The crisis decision forces the action that is the climax. The climax then plays out that decision, resolving the central conflict, answering that main story question, and creating a fundamental, lasting change in the character's life or their world.
So a really satisfying climax is essential. It's the payoff the audience has been waiting for.
Absolutely vital. It has to fulfill the promise, the vow, as McKee puts it, made by the inciting incident. It's where all that built-up narrative energy is finally released and the primary source of tension is resolved.
Yeah.
And then after the dust settles.
Then we get the resolution.
Right.
So after the big climax, what does life look like now? How have things changed for the characters, for their world? What's the new normal, the new balance?
Exactly. The resolution shows us the aftermath. It unveils the new status quo. Sometimes you get what are called closed endings, very common in Hollywood, where pretty much every question is answered, every loose end tied up neatly.
A clean finish.
Yeah. But then you also have open-ended solutions, which leave some things ambiguous, some questions lingering for the audience, for you to ponder. Think about the end of Paris, Texas. It leaves you with things to interpret.
Great, more ambiguous.
But even with those open endings, McKee stresses that the climax itself must still be satisfying. It has to deliver that emotional release, even if the resolution leaves some doors open. Like in Kiss of the Spider-Woman, the climax is definitive, even if the final moments are more interpretive.
So, bringing this all together, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into McKee's ideas? It seems clear that the stories that really resonate, the ones that stick with us, they aren't just random. They have this strong, almost invisible structure underneath.
That's right. A powerful skeleton. A start that shakes up a life, driven by that inciting incident, then scenes backed with continuous value shifts fueled by conflict, all structured within acts that build relentlessly towards a meaningful conclusion through that crucible of crisis and climax.
It really is a carefully constructed framework, isn't it? Even if we don't consciously see it when we're experiencing the story.
Absolutely. And if you boil it down, McKee's fundamental belief, his core thesis really is this: structure is everything. Form is paramount. It's that underlying architecture that allows the story's meaning and emotion to land with such impact.
Which leads to a really interesting question for you, our listeners, to think about. If structure is so crucial, as McKee argues, what about those stories that deliberately seem to break these rules? You know, the narratives we might call anti-story or minimalist plots, like that film Murray Bad from last year. It definitely played with conventional structure.
That's a great point. It does make you wonder, doesn't it?
Okay.
Do you perhaps need to fully master these traditional rules before you can effectively break them? Or maybe, even when you choose to deviate, does understanding this classical structure still provide a vital reference point, helping you understand the effect you're creating by choosing not to follow it? Something to chew on.
Definitely something to think about. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of story.
Boom 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 boom.